Hello and welcome back to the second Grasshopper Python lesson. In previous tutorial, we talked about variables and how to use Grasshopper component inside Python. If you haven't watched the first episode, please watch it and then come back here again. Today we're going to talk about another type of variables in Python called lists. Lists basic operations, and then see how lists are used in imported Grasshopper components in Python. A list is a data structure in Python that is mutable or changeable and ordered sequence of items, such as list of float, list of integer, list of strings, and list of boxes. You can also have lists with different type of variables in it. So how to define a list? In previous lesson, we learned how to define a variable by creating an equation such as a is equal to 4 means a is a variable name and the value inside it is 4, which is an integer. So to define a list, we should write the items of the list inside the square bracket. Like a is equal to open square bracket 5 and 3 close square bracket. Now we have a list which is filled with two items. First item is 5 and the second item is 3. And we separate each item of a list with a comma. Let's open our Python editor and define a list filled with 6 numbers. It can be both float and integer. Okay, numbers is equal to open square bracket 2 and 5 and 2.5 and 7 and 8 and 25 close square bracket. Hit OK. I cannot see the result because I didn't define the variable as our component output. So in order to do that, right-click on our output, which is A, and rename it to our list variable, which is numbers. We should refresh our Python. Open the editor and hit OK again. I'm going to connect panel to the result. Now we are going to know how to edit lists. I think this is one of the most important topics of our course. Okay, at the first we need to know how lists are organized. As you may know, in Grasshopper, whenever we have a list, we can see a number behind it, which represents the item order number. But you have to notice that order number starts from 0, not 1. And we call them index, and we also have component named list item, which works by defining list and indexed, then return items. To do this, I need to define a new variable to store the item that I find from the list. Number is equal to numbers 0, and number is equal to numbers 6. We got an error here. And it says index out of range because our list range is between 0 to 4. So you must set the index value between 0 to 4. You can also set the value from end of the list by defining negative indices like number is equal to numbers minus 1. You can also change the item by assigning new value to its index. Type numbers, open a square bracket, to close square bracket is equal to 100. Let's create something like list item component. At first, I'm going to create a list and name it test_list and put a number inside it. Okay, I want to control index from component input. So at first, I change x to index and change the type to integer. Open Python editor and type item is equal to test_list, open a square bracket, index, close a square bracket. Set the index to 2. Okay, it works correctly. Now we want to define a list from component input. To create a list in Grasshopper, drop down the panel in Grasshopper instead of adding comma between items. We hit OK. 2, 5, 5.6, 99.2, 25. Just click somewhere out to close the panel. Right-click on the panel and uncheck multi-line data, because we use enter to type next item. Now rename y to list, set type hint to float. Now we should tell the component input that we are using a list of floats, not a single float. To do that, right-click on input and set to list access, then connect panel to list input. Okay. It's not working with our new list because it's still working with the list that we defined inside Python. Okay, change it to list, hit OK. Well done, it's working correctly. In the first episode, we imported Grasshopper library in our Python and we used some of them. And all of them had one output, but most of the Grasshopper components have more than one output, so we should write a bit extra codes. I'm gonna define what is happening on an example. Let's drop down a move component. As you can see, it has two inputs and two outputs, but the problem with a component which has more than one output is that in the Python they pass two outputs inside the list. So output of move component is a list which has two items. First one is geometry and the second one is transform. Let's make a move component in Python. At first I'm going to define inputs. Change X to geometry and set the type hint to geometry base. Okay, change Y to transform and set the type hint to vector 3D. Usually we don't delete the output because it's reserved by Python and it will show you Python messages such as errors and warnings. So then rename an output to geometry and click on plus to add new output name. Name it transform. Open Python editor and import Grasshopper Python library. My_move is equal to gh.move open circular bracket geometry comma vector 3D close circular bracket. Now we know that my_move is the list which stores our outputs in it. Okay, O_geometry is equal to my_move 0. O_transform is equal to my_move 1. Alright, we did it to make sure that our component works correctly. I'm gonna bring center box and unit z vector. Let's connect them. Now you can see our Python component works perfectly. Okay, let's have a quick recap. You can create a list with this structure. List is equal to open square bracket index close square bracket. You can also define and divide each index by using comma between them. To access each index, after writing the list name, enter the number of index in the square bracket. You should consider the indices order. To access and export from start to end, you should start from 1 to the end. And to access from the end to start, you should start from -1 and continue. For example, to access and export the second index from this list from the start, you should type list1. The reverse form of it would be list -4. Also, you can export a specific index from a list to another proper variable. For example, if we copy the third index, which is equal to 22.2, to another variable like a is equal to list 3, our variable becomes a float and it's equal to 22.2. Alright, and for the last tip, we should consider defining a list and extracting indices from a list, which is one of the main structures of any programming language. By practicing, we can better understand that how does a list work. So we're done for today, but there are going to be more videos in our channel, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. We will catch you on the next episode. Bye.